Thank you, Randy, for that introduction. Welcome, everyone. Good evening. I thank you for taking time out of your very busy schedule and your lives to come and hang out with me so I can talk about what I do and share some information and maybe help you to expand your horizons and rethink food and nutrition and practice and whatever it is that you're doing in your life. Somehow we are all brought together by food. We are all brought together by culture and agriculture, and the act of cooking is a very intimate act. So, like she said, I'm from White River, Arizona, and every time I hear my bio read out loud, I'm like, that's pretty cool. I actually did all that, because I try to keep my focus on today, right? The here and now. I work for currently I work for the Rainbow Treatment Center. It's a drug and alcohol abuse treatment center in my community on the White Mountain Apache tribe. And in that agency, I'm the Nutritional Recovery Program Coordinator. And in my department exists Cafe Gojo. And Cafe Gojo is simply an effort to, number one, provide some vocational training in native foods and hospitality. But also it's to keep native foods in sight, in mind. Because across Native America, the conversation of public health disparities, and all these issues that we face that are related to preventable food-related diseases and traditional foods, one of the biggest obstacles across Native America is accessibility and access, or how to and who has the knowledge. So the perspective that we've chosen to take with the cafe is to keep native foods in mind, support local farmers, stimulate traditional markets, and buy as many wild indigenous Apache foods as possible. Therefore, because like myself, I don't speak Apache fluently, but the foods and the process are teaching it to me slow. Learning how to say ingredients in the Apache language is like honoring their true identity. It's like my name's Nephi, you wouldn't call me Greg, you know what I mean? It's like, that's how the plants feel. They're like, hey man, call me my real name, So that's the way I look at it. I try to have that kind of perspective. But the cafe is an effort to create a safe place for people in recovery, create a safe place for people that maybe are interested in managing their diabetes, or that are just interested in having a healthier, fresh option in the community of White River. Even though White River is one of the the White Mountain Apache tribe in northeastern Arizona is one of the most calorie-rich landscapes in the Southwest, we're still considered a food desert. And we will kind of talk about some of those themes. And I'm gonna do this intro, and then I'm gonna show a short clip, and then I'll do a Prezi. Who uses Prezi? Yeah, raise your hands. All right, we can be friends. You like getting people car sick with your Prezis? I try not to anymore. But anyway, some real quick nutshell approach to native foods. When I talk about indigenous foods, I'm talking about foods from Argentina up through Mexico into North America and into Alaska, and the indigenous peoples of the continent of Turtle Island. And there's a sentiment or saying that we didn't cross borders crossed us, right? And landscapes and dynamics of politics, power, prestige, and all these intricate things. As I was in culinary school, 19, 20 years ago, learning about the spice wars, the salt wars, the Renaissance, and all these momentous occurrences in world history that affect food, or that changed how food was used as currency or even consumed. I feel like right now we're living this resurgence after 500 years of conflict in colonization in North America, and in all parts of North America. Turtle Island. So now the dust is beginning to settle, and now the arts are beginning to flourish. The professions, there's more indigenous professionals now than there ever has been. More options for people to go down and pursue a professional pathway than ever before. Writers, screenplays, poets, literary people, doctors, surgeons, and chefs, cooks, right? where 50 years ago, a lot of these opportunities might have been out of reach. So after those years of conflict, the dust settles, the arts and professions begin to flourish, and we are at another phase of recovery and healing that involves our food, but it also involves many other elements and some of the things you'll see in my presentation. As a substance abuse treatment center, as a person in recovery myself, going on 9 years, I've been going on 8 years of sobriety. I have lived experience on top of my culinary experience and finding indigeneity, and hopefully this will be able to kind of frame what I'm going to refer to as doing our own trauma work. Any behavioral health people in here? Anybody? Any psychs? Hey. Well, I want to introduce something that is not just for people in recovery, it's for everyone. And it was based on a study by Kaiser Permanente, I think. And it's the ACE, known as the ACE study. Anybody know what it is? Yeah.
Adverse childhood experiences?
Yeah, it is. Adverse childhood experiences. And we're using it now to predict outcomes of all forms of different types of health disparities. And it's kind of, you can do your own study, but I'll put it in a nutshell. 1, 2, 3, 4. Basically, from the time we're born to the end of our life. But this adverse childhood experiences refers to from the time we're born until we're 18, because it's natural to be dependent before we're 18. That's fine. That's how it is. But when we're brought up in a world of chaos, unpredictability, instability, a number of different variables that are out of our control as little people, whether it's any type of abuse, parents were divorced or parents were on and off again, didn't have enough to eat growing up, didn't have clean clothes, any type of abuse you might have suffered, criminality in the home, what else? There's different types of neglect. Any one of those are categorized as an ACE or an adverse childhood experience. So if you experience that, you can actually go online and take an ACE quiz and find out where you stand with this. And this is a tool not to blame our parents, not to blame society, not to blame anyone. It's for us to understand us and look in the mirror and begin to unravel, understand ourselves. So basically all those kind of types of ACEs I mentioned, that basically sends the message to little kids that the world is not safe. That not even my parents can protect me. Not even my siblings can protect me. Not even my parents can feed me or clothe me. And then that affects how children think as they get older. So cognitive development or neurological connections are formed by chaos memories, right? You start to go into fight or flight mode, and you can stay in fight or flight mode all your life until you realize that's where you've been. And then it begins to affect how we adopt behaviors. I'll put risky behaviors. Adolescence, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th grade, right? And then maybe it begins to affect our social life. Becomes a disease, right? It impairs our decisions. So this is all self-defense for us. We learned that the world was not safe. We began to think and believe it was not safe. We began to, maybe middle school, adolescents, start vandalizing property, joining gangs, start smoking, early sexual activity, all these different things. And then that carries over into high school, maybe, right? And then if we don't intervene, we can stay in that high school mindset for a long time, and we eventually develop. This is where diabetes, heart disease, addiction, incarceration, these things begin to happen as a result of those early childhood experiences. And the only outcome of this is early death. And you can apply this to people that are incarcerated, have gone to prison, are smokers, are drinkers, heroin addicts, people in recovery, people with health problems. So it's a very, very useful tool, and for people of color or indigenous peoples, we can even expand this pyramid to include 2 more layers. And I'll just really quickly, we expand for people of color. Expanding the ACE pyramid requires us to go into the social, the racial, the class, and then it takes us even deeper to historical trauma, to historical injustice, right? All these themes that go much, much deeper intergenerationally. So this is a very valuable tool, and I know where I score, and I intervened when I was 30, and I stopped using, right? And so I'm in recovery. I'm in remission, right? I don't have those criminality symptoms, or I don't have those toxic masculinity symptoms anymore. I've chosen to disengage from this cycle. So this is kind of the framework for a lot of the work that we do. And again, it's not just for people in recovery. And so I want to frame it with that and open the kind of the class to this. I'm going to show really quickly before I do. One topic in this field of native foods is food sovereignty. Anyone hear that term before? Yeah, food sovereignty, indigenous resurgence, decolonization, indigeneity, right? Reclamation, all those kind of things. Food sovereignty is the ability to grow your own food and create your own programming around food systems and to protect it and to do what you will and not be imposed on, right? And food is at the center of every culture's universe. So for indigenous people, it's a matter of resurgence. And I like to talk about indigenous foods, changing the world. What do you think? What kind of cooking do you think of when you think of tomatoes? What cuisine? Pizza, marinara. But there were no tomatoes anywhere in Italy before 1500. Nowhere.
How are people not thinking about salsa?
Yeah, right? Exactly.
Seriously?
Yeah, exactly, right? There were no tomatoes in Europe anywhere before 1500. And when they did make it to Europe, they sat around for about 200 years as their decorative plant. And I always say it wasn't until some Italian dude got all hungry, he went, and he didn't die, right? Because they thought it was a poisonous plant. And I always compare it to that moment on 2001 Odyssey where the monkey discovers violence, right? And then the red sauce emerges, pizza emerges, marinara, the Espanol sauce, it changes the cuisine of the Mediterranean forever, right? All the spicy cuisines of India and Asia, Thailand, Szechuan, Korea, all spiced by capsaicin, right? There were other forms of heat and spices, but the chilies, non-existent all over the Mediterranean, India, and Asia before 1500. So indigenous ancestral intelligence and agricultural knowledge revolutionized the world. Corn got to the way it is by human interaction. It's a grass. Started out as teosinte, and all the different colors and types, ceremonies, songs, identities. I can, as an Apache from the White Mountains, we're taught to tell our creation story with black or dark blue corn in the east as the birth of a new idea, with blue in the south as a representation of growing up. And then yellow in the west as a time for production and work and adulthood, and then white in the north with reflection and reaching that cycle of old age. So, and there's many more dynamics to the creation story that can be told through corn. I like to say that one kernel of corn or indigenous seed, it's like a microchip. It's an indigenous microchip. And a seed contains all the data necessary. So like if a kernel of corn is a SIM card, an indigenous person is the correct device it goes in, right? So, and where does that data come from? It's cosmological. It's photosynthesis, right? It's spiritual. It's evidence that life is a spiritual experience. So, chocolate, another indigenous food, sacred form of currency, ceremonial food. Today, $1 billion industry, right? So exotification and foods being taken out of the hands of the people that need it the most. The Three Sisters, a combination of corn, beans, and squash, originated with companion planting, interplanting those cultivars together because the beans provide the corn provides a beanstalk. The beans release nitrogen into the soil. The squash shades, the squash leaf shades the soil and prevents erosion. And so from seed all the way until we eat them, they're working together in this symbiotic relationship. With corn missing a couple amino acids, the beans and the squash provide that to complete a protein. So from seed all the way until we consume it, they're working together in this relationship. And we taught this, I use that as a teaching tool for kindergarten students, to graduate students, to food scientists, because it speaks to so much power and working together. And it's also known as a milpa planting too, if you add a couple other ingredients. Squash. I have a winter squash. The neck was cut off, but here's the cavity. Everyone ever wonder why cavity squash is so nutritious? You want to guess? Throw out a guess. You can be all scientific if you want. Or... What do you think? Anyone want to throw out a guess? Here's what I was told. Is that the reason it's so nutritious? Because as its mama. Right? It has all those little babies in there. It needs to carry all those nutrients to sustain and continue life. So that's why it's so nutritious. And the seeds are packed with nourishment and all this wonderful stuff. So cavity squash is a female plant. It's continuing that cycle. It's a really interesting philosophical, spiritual, emotional journey to reclaim these foods. And food sovereignty is a movement that's happening all over in micro pockets from Argentina through Alaska. And I'd like to share a short clip of other voices across Native America. So could you hit those lights in the back? And I will... You want to attack the people and wipe them out, attack their food. Millions of people all across the Americas with complex civilizations, complex trade routes, complex societies, systematically eradicated or wiped out. Alcoholism, addiction, lateral violence, structural violence, homicide, suicide rates on reservations. That's an intergenerational fallout effect of historical trauma. That's the reason that we don't have that relationship with some of those traditional foods anymore. And it's through foodways that we engage in a recovery from historical trauma and colonialism. And when we talk about these things, if some feeling of uncomfort arises in you, don't shut off, but ask yourself why. The first step in this is understanding violence in all its forms.
Cochiti, I think, has been here for at least 800 years. And they've always farmed. This is our farm area, and of course the Cochiti Dam has put it all underwater now. It is such a desecration of Mother Earth. Farming just came to a halt. And so, that part of our way of life, with a connection to the land, our prayers, our dances, and so forth, were seriously impacted by what happened to
We said it's a given right. How can you stop us from fishing? Boom. Come help us, man. We got the feds in here knocking our heads, pulling our nets, saying that we can't fish. They were taking our whole way of life, the lifeline of the Hupa people.
We didn't sign any treaties with the government. They just put us here as an executive order. They removed us from hundreds and hundreds of acres of ancestral homeland where we could farm, where we could forage, hunt, do all these things that sustained us. That was ripped away from us.
out here and you see the buffalo walking by, or when it's snowing or whenever, how they just look like they're meant to be here, and it just looks so right.
Just think if there was a million of them, how that would sound. A lot of things are lost in the culture from all the genocide and forced acculturation, but this is where it was learned to begin with. So you build big buffalo herds, go study them, and you can relearn anything that was lost. I mean, it's just amazing how much better they looked and fit with the land the bigger the herd.
Looking at all the chronic health issues that our people are dealing with, we're at this day and age to where we need to bring farming back to our communities, revitalizing that traditional agriculture, that spiritual aspect that our people had with food, and bringing that back into our communities, bringing it back into our homes. This is our identity as Apache people.
When you have food sovereignty, you're free to be self-reliant, to grow your own food, and really be self-sustaining or sustainable. You feel the heat? It's nice and hot, so it's almost there. I'm going to go ahead and add. The way that cooking helps to combat all forms of violence is that it's practicing emotional intelligence. It's the act of nurturing. This is how people would preserve their seeds, because right now, if these get wet, they'll sprout and they can rot. Cool, huh? My background is classical French, but when I left culinary school to start and explore the universe of native foods, the great chefs that I looked up to, they didn't have the ancestral knowledge. Guess who had it? Grandma, auntie, uncles, my brothers, everyone that were back home at ground zero where colonialism was live in effect.
Knowing that it had helped me, I shared that a lot with other people and take them out harvesting. I love seeing that excitement, especially in the young people's faces when the first time they're like doing this. It brings them a sense of identity and reconnecting themselves with the land and their ancestors and who they really are.
You take care of yourself by eating all these indigenous foods that are meant for your body. And when you do that, you have the strength to take care of the people you love. And when you take care of the people you love, it inspires everyone to take care of the land that we all need to live. You're born with the stress. You're born with a burden of being indigenous. And it's the truth. So when you have generations of people who live like this, and they've taught you to live like this, and all of a sudden there's not enough fish in the river to live that way, it's a strong chance that your culture will not make it. You have to learn how to pass down these traditions and these things that we do to the next generation. My grandmother always told me that one day they're going to need people like us. I didn't really know what she meant, but now I know that it's important for us to learn this so we pass it on to these kids. And I know that my sacrifice and my pain will be worth it when one day I won't be needed. That's my goal.
We are the subsistence fishermen. We don't sell our fish. We don't sell our deer meat. We don't sell none of our native foods. We fought all kinds of wars, and we're right back here fighting another war for our way of life. We fight for the freedom of all natives to have our native food.
We call it the restorative revolution. That's what we say, because everywhere we see this, everybody is refinding their strength and their roots, and it makes me so happy to be a part of it.
I wonder sometimes, how come we're still here? You know? I think it's because we still have our traditions, based on giving to one another, sharing with one another, and caring for each other. Believe it or not, you know, the old way of life is where we have to look to.
learning a lot about what we've always done for centuries. It reconnected me to who I really am. I'm a beautiful Apache woman. No one can ever tell me no different.
Our ancestors saw the world end once. That whole life was gone. Now we're on the other side of the apocalypse. So that's why I say what we do is kind of like an apprenticeship to truth and recovery. We're not transforming food so much, but food is transforming us.
You can get those lights in the back there again. So that was a a short clip of a longer documentary that's coming out soon on food sovereignty, and it's called Gather. And as you saw, the different tribes, the producers of that approached us and asked if we would be a part of it. And at first I said no, because I said, okay, who are you? What are you going to do with this knowledge? What are you going to do with this wisdom? And why do you want it from us? You know, because too many film crews come in and just kind of come in with a sense of saviorism and do more damage than good. So I had to really it took them over repeated attempts and me clarifying, and finally I said, okay, I'll do it. But as you can see, there's other voices in this this process. It's much more than fine dining and restaurateurism and all these other things. It's a cultural, spiritual act to reclaim our foodways, and it concerns our health. And when we're going to talk about the health disparities and food choices, and yesterday I did a presentation on basically that attempts to answer the question like, hey, Chef Nephi, how come I haven't ever seen a Native American cuisine restaurant? How come I ain't never seen a Native chef before? And so that took you on the journey through some elements of historical trauma. But this is kind of an elaborate, this is another piece of that series. So this presentation I'll run you through is I titled it The Psychology of Indigenous Food and Eating series, because this goes on. And a lot of times we have to create the terms we need to articulate the indigenous experience. And one of those is restorative indigenous food practices. And so this technique, it integrates developments from a whole bunch of different disciplines, from nutrition to education, organizational development, indigenous leadership, recovery principles. Ultimately, in order to build healthy communities, increase social capital, decrease crime and antisocial behavior, repair and restore relationships. Restorative indigenous food practices also utilizes place-based indigenous food and agriculture methodology as an access for therapeutic learning, teaching, and healthy communication while revitalizing our culture and wellness. And that's just one type. We always, in this food history, I always break it up into three pieces. Precolonization, where the cultures of Turtle Island were extremely complex. Chocolate made it all the way up to Chaco Canyon through trade routes. Abalone shells are still a part of our Apache culture from the coast. So there's very intricate trade routes because of these thriving civilizations. Indigenous agriculture. People say, what's native foods? Is it just Frybread or X, Y, and Z? Like, no. People, like we reference the tomato, the chocolate, the chili, the potatoes. Most of the world has been eating indigenous cuisine or foods for about 500-600 years now, not even knowing it. So indigenous science and medicine, these complex trade routes, domestication of corn, beans, and squash, tomatoes, chilies, cocoa, etc. We could go on and on and on, from vanilla to sunchokes to tons and tons of these cultivars and wild foods. Ancestral health, knowledge, and justice. So all of these are parts of a really ancient civilization that was pre-colonization. And I call it historical culinary trauma specifically for these purposes that relate to food, health, and culture, and this era of conquest and colonization, this 500-600 really bloody and violent era that some call the Indian Wars, the boarding school era, where a fraction of Native kids from reservations were put in boarding schools, introduced to new foods, new thoughts, new ideologies. And so the boarding school era in me as a Native person, it's kind of like the reservation system wasn't enough. Another form of warfare had to be carried out on the minds of innocent children who were the survivors of the prisoners of war, right? So it had to be on all different fronts. The bison extermination, like that clip showed, and we could say that for the bison, the salmon, wild rice populations, even different planting techniques that survived this onslaught. And then so all these combination of these is basically the ethnogenocide of people, land, and waters. And this is our trauma narrative as Indigenous peoples. This is what we generationally have been shamed to not talk about. This is what we've been conditioned to say, oh, it was a long time ago, that didn't happen. I'm okay, I have a job, I'm a chef, I have a phone, I have a ride, it doesn't affect me. But that's not true. The way I say the emotional evidence that it's real is that when you feel uncomfortable, when you see those black and white images of the massacres and the battles, that feeling is the sense of denial that you're shutting down, right? Even as Native peoples, we feel that. So it's very, very recent for us as Native peoples and in the American psyche. Today we're in this era of what I call Indigenous Resurgence, and I've heard other scholars and writers use that term too, but where we are healing from historical trauma, social recovery, we create decolonization strategies, we begin to speak for the land or become land advocates, planting foods that are appropriate for the soil instead of monocropping. In my community, they monocropped in the 80s like crazy, just because some non-native came in and said, this is what you're going to grow, this is what you'll get the most money out of. But now where the farm you saw in the film, that was our farm at Ndebi. And the farmers there, they're struggling against the deep root systems that are in place because of that monocropping. Indigenous foodway models, they're more and more common now among other tribes. Indigenous research, an example being Reagan and her work with the wild spinach. That was probably impossible and might not have ever gotten the prominent scientific examination that it did had she not been sparked by her curiosity and pursued it against all odds and all cultural obstacles that might exist for her as a student in academia. So, and that's just one example. Challenging the false narrative of American history. There's a great book by Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz called Indigenous Peoples' History of the United States. And in that she calls the 2-3 page narrative we got in high school, she calls that the master narrative. That's the conditioning short pieces of literature that say Native American people were not intelligent, were not thriving, they had nothing in place, so we gave them a better life. But in reality, it's the exact opposite. And so challenging that false narrative and creating intelligent spaces where we can carry on that conversation. And when we talk about these things, it's not, again, like bringing up the adverse childhood experiences. Imagine that on a mass scale. Imagine the displacement, the boarding schools, the interruption of parenting patterns, the interruption of cooking techniques, the loss of planting technology, right? All these different elements being interrupted and causing this really, I always say, like, it's like as if somebody dropped a bunch of atomic bombs all over Native America, right? They blow up everywhere. And then the next generation or the survivors have all these serious effects. Then the second generation, third generation, they continue to feel it. Well, these are unseen atomic bombs that are still perpetuating in different cycles today. In this cultural resurgence, we have to have the courage to speak to these issues, but have a kind heart and a sense of self-determination and responsibility. Just like that ACE diagram over there, it's not to blame our parents. Talking about these issues, it's not to blame the government or the people or the society, right? It's to look at ourselves, because decolonization and change happens in us first, in us, in everyone in this room. It happens on how we absorb the information. Are we intimidated by it? Are we afraid of it? And what are we going to do? So causing a cultural paradigm shift, it's like when someone points out the arrow in the FedEx logo to you, you can never unsee it, right? So hopefully that happens with some of this info here. All along the way, native cuisine has evolved for me, and now this is one of the definitions that I really appreciate now that I create. So cultural intuition guides us to develop indigenous cuisine in an indigenous way. Therefore, indigenous cuisine will not be fine dining focused, but rather driven by ancestral memory and the priority of healing indigenous communities. This is the scholarly, scientific, therapeutic, and spiritual nature of native foods in our generation and since time immemorial. So basically, it's nothing new what I'm doing. Maybe I can integrate technology and have a farther reach, but all the principles that I operate according to are inside the culture already. Everything that I try to base my work on existed long before I came. So in all reality, I'm just a reed or a conduit and in this longer chain of healing. And so since time immemorial, it's been this way. So for us, our indigenous culinary future, it's about activating ancestral knowledge. And here's a picture of one of my hometown heroes, Andrea Beatty, cutting up a roasted agave stock, or in Apache we call it a cuz. And look at how interested those kids are. If they've never tasted fire-roasted cuz before or agave stock, they don't have the neurological connection in place to hold that taste memory data. But the moment they taste it in that scenario, right, they've created a neural pathway that will last for the rest of their life. And when they taste it again, they might be brought back to that moment, like that movie, like Ratatouille, remember? He goes back when he's all hurt, he's a little boy, right? So that's the power of food memories and creating new reference points by activating what's in our DNA. Community-based work, making sure that we always keep it local and build relationships. In an urban context, it could be building relationships with our restaurants or our farmers or our friends like in the college, in the university setting. We build and thrive as humans on relationships. No one does it alone, but only you can do it, is one of the sayings. This is we need academia, not to say that it's impossible without this academic articulation, but there needs to be this intelligent merging of the knowledge and how it's transmitted. Conducting research in an ethical manner, challenging the notion of having a saviorism attitude, thinking that we're going to help the natives, you know what I mean? Or those kind of attitudes that come from circles unknowingly. So seeing more native scholars, producing more native work is really exciting in this era of resurgence. And something to remember, when it comes to our food and our programs or whatever you happen to do in your career or in school or wherever on your journey you may go, if whatever it is that you do is inaccessible to the poor, it's neither radical nor revolutionary, because we all started out in some form with nothing, or somebody gave us a chance when we failed. Someone saw in us what we couldn't see in ourselves and allowed us to thrive and begin to grow and get stronger. So in my community, this is kind of a subconscious credo, because if we can't provide the native foods to the native people where the ancestral memories and ancestral knowledge resides, we're basically exporting all this wealth, or this spiritual wealth, instead of keeping it real at home. And this is a fun one. It has to be transformational, right? And I use this one because, see the little image on the right, or on your left over there? That's how you, before you begin training, right? That's how you come into my kitchen over there on that side. Curious, alone, cold, hungry, outside, right? And then you come and get some training, you're ready to surge against the forces of colonialism and the colonial structure, right? But it has to transform your life. You have to be willing to be a student and a teacher, because in all reality, we learn the most from teaching. It has to be relevant and tangible. most of the time when I teach, I don't teach in my chef coat. Because this puts on this kind of, I'm like a chameleon, you know, like I code switched and I'm a professional chef, right? But when I'm wearing my t-shirt or my street clothes, it has a different feel from the audience. But what we produce when it comes to native foods, it needs to seem like, you need to see it and be like, hey, I can do that, or hey, my grandma does that, or hey, it's just like how we've done it before, or it has to be relevant and tangible. And this is an image that we created because I was looking across the internet to try to find an image of an Apache chef that we could use for a youth program. Nothing existed. All I found was skinny cartoons or big chubby guys, you know, with the wine bottle and they're all, you know what I mean? Those funny cartoons of like maitre d's and all that. And so like that typical chef's like, all right, we're going to create it because we want to make cooking and health cool. So this is a young chef in training. He's got his eagle feather for protection. He's in a battle, and he's using his knife skills for good. And indigenous cuisine and indigenous foods, it does require us to understand the generational effects of historical culinary trauma and breaking free of dependency. Because being dependent or dependency is not an indigenous trait. Self-determination is, reliance is, intelligence, those are indigenous traits. Dependency across reservations and in pockets of poverty or communities of color, it was created systematically. And sometimes when we get into discussions where we're talking about politics or the government or the military or the social situations that enabled these, some people get uncomfortable. But what's important is that in order to displace us and take us away from our foodways, the process of doing that was a legal process. It was a governmental process. It was socially acceptable. It was a religious process. So we cannot unravel the knot without addressing all of those political, governmental, legal, historical views. And it's just a part of the puzzle. So that's kind of what that picture always makes me think of. It was created, not a natural thing. Black and white images, they're not far away. This is the Carlisle School where my great-grandfather, Joseph Carly Ivins, when he was about 9 years old or 8 years old, put on a train in Holbrook, Arizona and shipped across the country. He's not in this picture, but he was in another wave at the Carlisle School where the motto is kill the Indian, save the man. And so the impact of trauma and how these kids take that home and how they're, the confusion of identity, the world's not safe, it's never going to be safe, I'm going to pick up a dangerous behavior or risky behavior, I become diseased and I die before I'm 30, right? So a lot of these factors we're beginning to talk about, and it's safer to talk about now than it ever has been. Place-based ancestral knowledge is extremely powerful. In academia, the term that native scholars are using is TEK, or traditional ecological knowledge, where they're unraveling and articulating the depth of this, something as simple as dry farming or seed saving, or the relationship of people and corn that brought it to what it is today. That's traditional ecological knowledge that's changed the world. So really depth of wisdom based on place-based interaction with the landscape. Here's one of my favorite pictures of Turtle Island. Look at all those beautiful brown faces. Like I just represent one pocket of indigeneity from the White Mountain Apache tribe up in that region up there in North America. But in Brazil, when I traveled to Sao Paulo, Brazil, I got to see for the first time in my life that there were indigenous Brazilians using native foods to fill the void like I was. And that said it's an international plight. And so imagine everything that I'm talking about or some of those other voices mentioned in that short clip and multiply that across Turtle Island through all these pockets of indigeneity, all that ancestral knowledge. It needs protection and advocacy. We've already witnessed and experienced the exotification of quinoa, chocolate, seaweed, cocoa, chilies, tomatoes, and the cultural appropriation of that is colonial violence because we have not benefited from that. Maybe we've been eating tomatoes all our life, but we didn't even know that was an indigenous food. And even for me too as a chef, I didn't even know that until about maybe 10 years ago. So all my life I grew up thinking tomatoes were possibly, Italian food, So internalizing it on both non-natives and natives is this journey forward, but recognizing and protecting the cultural protocols around food is important in native cuisine. And I look at this transfer of ancestral knowledge, and I do believe that every single culture has a form of ancestral knowledge and that it's sacred. In this context, we're talking about indigenous peoples, but there's two living characters here, right? Grandma and then little granddaughter. But in my opinion, I see there's another living thing here, and it's the energy or the knowledge that's being passed on. That knowledge is given life by passing it on. So it's an emotional, a relationship-based passing of this info that keeps it alive. And to me, that's sacred. That's a special thing. So here's another term that we had to kind of come up with: ancestral justice. We call it a living action verb, or a noun or an adjective. So a term used by indigenous peoples engaged in indigenous resurgence through restorative indigenous food practices to articulate genetic biological messages of dignity and resiliency transmitted through living human fractals. Ancestral justice is directly connected to ancestral memory and the restoration of balance in indigenous lifeways. Example, living a good life of integrity while activating ancestral knowledge in life on the red road. So basically, doing our best to embody the principles that are in the lessons the food carry, in the principle of very hard work and honest hard work that comes with farming and cooking, living up to those standards and principles on an everyday basis, and promoting change. So, as you can see, it is, when we talk about native foods, it is this process of restoring, or some people will say reclaiming, or some people will say revitalizing, we'll say restoring. There's all these different terms, but ultimately it's a return to these really simple human practices. And so when we talk about activating it in the work that we do, we'll bring this up. We'll say what happened. When we don't say, what's wrong with you, right? We say, what happened to you, right? Because that's a more gentle way to approach the deeper issue. And this is something to look into for all of us. And then especially if we're maybe teachers in the university, we have young people coming in, they haven't decided exactly what they're going to do yet, right? And they might be carrying some stuff where there's trauma work that needs to be done, right? So what the structure for this presentation, I wanted to show you some of these examples and highlight references, and show you that also it does involve supporting indigenous farmers. I brought some ingredients with me. This is from Ramona Farms, and you can get a whole bunch of different products from Ramona Farms by email and all kinds of cool stuff. I brought a part of this cultural resurgence of native foods involves the native communities culturally, appropriately producing and packaging their own products. And this one's Red Lake Nation maple syrup. Maple syrup is an indigenous food. It's an indigenous practice. But we think it's American, right? But it's an indigenous practice. And this one's from the Red Lake Nation, Anishinaabe tribe. Wild rice. I got a cool little pancake mix. I bought this at our farm store in Dependency in White River. But wild rice pancake mix, these cool little things that represent who we are. A desert food. These are from the San Xavier Co-op Farm and down in near Tucson area. Cholla buds. Anyone had cactus before, like the nopales? Right? Yeah, right? You can eat the cholla cactus. Anyone ever hear of the jumping cactus? Anybody? Like you throw a rock at it or hit it and it explodes. It shoots off all these things. Yeah, so if you tell your friend, go walk by it and hit it, it'll go hit him, But these are the buds. And when we talk about a lot of native peoples being lactose intolerant, these have a huge amount of calcium and in them. So plant-based proteins, a way to get our calcium, and all other new ingredients. This is kind of the story behind Frybread, right? This is the story that we forgot to tell, or it wasn't safe to tell. Ingredients like agave. This is not a native produced product, but I bought it as an example. In Apache we call it a cuz, and it's the plant, it's the stalk, it's the heart, and it's the long stalk that comes out of the middle. But doing our best to support emerging markets, culinary talent, and serving our community these foods is where this process of healing begins. And so it's this journey forward, and it requires us together, like every one of us in this room, to have a intelligent conversation that as best possible we let go of our biases, because some of the information I presented today I know challenges your ideals. I have no doubt. And sometimes it feels dangerous as a presenter to kind of go in this journey. But that's okay. I know it's a safe space in academia. I know we're all responsible people, but this is kind of how the journey forward feels on all different levels, whether it's with little grade school kids or professionals. It's a really amazing process of restoration in a lot of ways. Does anyone have any questions? We'll open it up to some questions now. Yes, way in the back.
How do you cook with the choya bugs? What do you make?
When they cook, they like double in size, maybe more than double in size. The flavor is like a cross between artichoke and asparagus. It's not as sticky as like nopales, but it's pretty tasty. Really good to do. You just put in water and simmer it about maybe 45 minutes. Tepary beans up here, they're great for diabetics, high in protein, low in the glycemic index, and they're a cultural food. So another good example of some of the richness behind some of these. Any other thoughts? Yes, please.
You mentioned sunchokes.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you have any cooking tips or recipes for that.
Oh, they're awesome. Raw, cooked, steamed, hey, all kinds of ways. I like to roast them. Like for the restaurant, I like to roast them, mash them, and then fry them because they get all sticky and crunchy and gooey, and coat them with some honey and chili. It'd be awesome. Wish I had a fryer here, right? Any other thoughts or questions? Yes, please. I recommend books by cookbooks. Let's see. There's Foods of the Southwest Indian Nations by Lois Ellen Frank. There's Foods of the Americas by Fernando Davina. That was in collaboration with the National Museum of the American Indian. I recommend Peace, Power, and Righteousness. It's not a cookbook, but it's by Taike Alfred. Talks about decolonization and cultural resurgence. There's quite a few books out there. You got to search for them, though. Follow hashtags, Indigenous foods, food sovereignty. It'll lead you to all the cool stuff, for real. Because most of the community sentiment around native foods can be found in social media, not in publications right now. That's what's happening right now. Maybe it will when we start getting more active and there's spaces to produce more work like that. But right now it's more represented in social media. It's kind of cool. So, anyone have any other thoughts or questions?
I have a question.
Yes, please.
What are some of the programs that you do with NACA?
The Native American Culinary Association, I started it based on that simple observation of not having a native chef to train under when I was 18. And so NACA has always been to support emerging culinary talent, and also to, it's not a 501c3, it's not a formal organization. We look at it as gathering in the spirit of ceremony and bringing in people that are willing to support it for a common purpose. So like a sunrise dance ceremony, for example, on our tribe, family, friends, and people come and they contribute their time and effort because they understand the cause. And that's kind of the spirit of how we've done NACA. We had our first gathering in 2003, then about 10 years later, we had another conference at Sunrise Park Resort. We brought in about 9 different native chefs. And it started out just to show my culinary team at the hotel when I was 29 that I wasn't some crazy fanatic about food. Is to show them that there's other native chefs and practitioners and farmers and scholars out there so that they could see it was possible. And then that grew to 2 years later, we had another one at the Arizona Desert Museum in Tucson, Arizona, and that drew about almost 1,000 people. And so that draw made us kind of step back and realize, what are we doing? Are we doing more harm than good? Are we putting more cultural intellectual property out than we should, right? So we kind of scale back and have these discussions amongst ourselves. But we'll probably do another gathering sometime in the Southwest this year or maybe next year. So yeah, and we probably won't find it on social media. But who knows? We'll see. Any other thoughts or questions? I'm open to as many questions as you'd like to throw out there. I like to say I overcooked your noodles. Yes, way in the back. Sorry, I'll come back.
Can you talk about appropriate ways for universities or people who work at universities to support the type of work you're doing without running into some of the pitfalls you've been talking about?
I think it's based on building healthy relationships and creating the support systems for Native or Indigenous students to carry out the work that they choose to do, and not coming in with kind of preset notions. Understanding themes like microaggressions, right? Or understanding those unseen biases that we all carry, right? And not continuing that cycle to Indigenous students as they carry out the work, or as we go into communities, if that's where your work takes you. So, yeah, I hope that answers it. Does it answer it? Yeah. Anyone have another question? Yes, yes.
Have you noticed any connection between eating local foods and having fewer allergies?
Yeah, like I know that when you can consume like local honey, it kind of lowers it strengthens you against like pollen in the area. But the way we like to look at it is we say if you can basically eat colorful, it has a better effect. And then when we talk about brain function in the recovery process, we encourage the expansion of food knowledge so that we can stimulate our brains more and learn and be optimal and have that kind of effect on us. So and whatever foods are available to us locally, that includes our indigenous or wild foods too. And it's pretty cool because it's really therapeutic to go and gather acorns or gather ingredients or to even dig in the dirt. So it's a lot of fun. Any other thoughts, questions? Yes, yes, yes.
You were talking about how eating the native foods will work with your DNA and help maybe decrease some chronic diseases.
Yeah.
Is there any studies going on, or do you plan to do any studies?
I'm sure there are. As far as like, I know like a clinical psychologist or Dr. Joe Gunn does some really amazing stuff. I think he's Ojibwe. And then there's Dr. Michael Yellowbird, who's doing research now on the indigenous biome, basically the gut bacteria that before colonization, and then now the gut bacteria that exists. And since bacteria is alive, it wants to practice self-preservation. So the theory is that's producing cravings for these non-indigenous foods, therefore perpetuating more consumption of wheat, large sugar, alcohol, and getting diabetes. So Dr. Yellowbird and really cool mindfulness practice, like Yoda, basically. But yeah, those two good resources come into my mind right away. Any other thoughts or questions? Crickets.
So please join me in thanking Chef.
Yeah, I really genuinely thank you for your time and attention and sitting through the whole presentation and coming on this journey, because it is an expanding, breathing heart. It goes into the past, it goes into the future, it taps into potential, it talks about here and now, and it's a scary thing to change our lives. So I thank you for being receptive, and you can come on up and take a look at some of these ingredients. I got some cool Café Gojo cell phone stickers for you to take or put on your TV remote. And you can take a picture of some of these products, because if you want to buy some of these, most of these you can get on the internet and find their websites and source them out. And that's how you can support the native food movement also. So thank you again.